There we go. So this is my locomotion system. So the system has three main parts. One, I can move around like that. Two, I can jump. And three, I can, use my hands. So the one thing it doesn't have yet is grabbing. I can't grab stuff. I'm separating that from the locomotion system. However, it still works. Very cool. So the way that I tie the player to a rigid body in the game, so that I don't go through walls and all that, is that I have one rigid body for the entire player body, besides the hands, and one for each hand. All cool? Then, the way that I handle real-life movement by the player, so I'm walking around in my room right now, all cool, is that I keep the origin of the rigid body always in the center of the room. Say the top of this box is the VR play space, and the center, on the floor, is always going to be the origin of the rigid body. So even though I'm moving around like this, rigid body isn't moving. However, when I'm walking around like this, say this is me, I'm walking around my room, right? I also have a collider, sphere collider below me, that is following that position. I've done tests with this, and it doesn't impact performance, so it's fine. And the result is that makes it so that I don't go through walls. Another important thing is that I have the fixed time step synced up to the refresh rate of the headset. The physics are all per frame, and that makes things very smooth. However, because I have the thing always in the center, as long as I interpolate the motion of the rigid body below me, if the refresh rate doesn't match, fake movement will still be fine, and the real world movement won't be affected, because it isn't handled by physics. And that was the biggest change from my older systems, is just stripping everything down and making it super simple. Another thing I've done to achieve the goal of simplicity is just to never use joints. Never. So every action-reaction pair is handled completely through scripts, and this lets me cheat a little bit. So for example, when I push on this box, I also have a force that's pushed back on me. But because I'm handling all of those forces through scripts, I can just say that the force goes directly into the floor. So to demonstrate, instead of pushing me, it pushes the floor. So all of the things I've just done are to just minimize the amount of forces that the player actually experiences. That's super good at minimizing motion sickness. However, when the player jumps, all that stuff doesn't matter. Another thing to go over is lateral movement. Moving around with the joystick, right? So, it always has an action-reaction pair. When I move forward, the floor also gets that force put back on it. So if I'm going to walk on here, bam, the floor gets moved around with me. Another thing I've done with that movement is I've considered the velocity of the player relative to the floor that they're standing on. This makes it so that even if the floor is moving, you move with it. Another thing I've done with that system is that I apply a pretend reaction force to the real world movement that I'm doing when I'm just walking around my room to the floor. So if I stand on a dynamic object and I was to walk around, you can see that forces are being applied to the floor, which is super cool because it feels like I'm pushing the floor around. And I just get the force that I'm applying to myself by tracking the acceleration of my head, and then I multiply it by the mass of my main rigid body. I think that's enough detail for that. Next is the jumping system. So for jumping, I implemented a system that was similar to Boneworks in the way that you crouch and then you jump up. This has the benefit of meaning that it has that mechanic where if you jump in real life, you jump higher. And the way that I've modeled the force of that jump is just through F equals K delta X. Super simple. And to make sure that if I were to, say, go up a step while jumping, I limit the force so that the velocity of the player doesn't exceed that if they're going up a step. And this spring force only applies when the player's desired floor level, say here, is below the current floor level, which I find with the raycast. So the force will push the floor up until it meets, and of course, it'll jump. Another thing that I've done with that is I've made it so that when you're moving up vertically, your feet will automatically retract so that you can jump onto higher surfaces. So I have this thing tracking where my feet are, my like fake feet. So if I jump, see that it goes and then it raises before going down to floor level. So you can see it goes up, retracts, and then goes down. That's just to help you jump onto higher ledges. This system also applies if I'm doing this just with my hands. So you can see that when I'm jumping by pushing down on the surface, it still retracts my legs. I think I've covered everything about that. Now just the hands. So the physics part of the hands are done with two forces. One is a positional seeking force, so that it matches the position of my current hand. I'll type in the equation that I use for that. And the change in time that I used for the equation was just twice the fixed time step. You can make that coefficient higher to make it seem more heavy when you move things, like what they do in Half-Life Alyx. But for the moment, I've just locked it at twice. The second force that I use is a velocity seeking force. I think that this is the most important one in making the physics feel responsive. And what I've done is I have separated the hand that is being rendered from the physics object, so that I can make it so that when a hand is far away from any colliders, it just does the transform of the object, but when I get close to it, then it starts showing the physics. And as you move closer to an object, it'll transition from the transform to the rigid body. And the result feels really good, I think. To me, this feels way better than a joint system for the hands. Because I'm doing all of this through script, I can handle where the reaction forces end up. That's basically it for how it works. However, there's some cool things that emerge from this, such as this is the normal height that I can jump out there. However, if I were to climb up the wall while I jump, I can get significantly higher, and the result of that system kind of feels like parkour. So I can do stuff like this, climb up ledges. It's super fun. Very easy. I love it. I find that climbing on things like this is super smooth. In general, when pushing down on an object, it just matches the velocity of my hands because of that velocity-seeking force. It makes it really easy to control the system. Jump up on things like that. So I'm really happy with it. And of course you have situations like this, where I can just push against the wall, climb up. Very cool. And of course, I can always use this. Very cool. And for a locomotion system like this, the code, I think, is really simple. So yeah, moving around with this system, very, very cool. Very cool. And yeah, that's just about it.